كما أشار له المسؤولون العسكريون.
The United States is in a state of confusion and surprise.
We fear this. We fear that they have something else that majority of the people don't know about.
Olan tüm halkların hakları gibi haklar. Ne aşağı ne yukarı, ne fazla ne az.
Pent-up feelings that may result from decades of repression and people who've had members of their family killed by that regime.
A lot of killers. Get a lot of killers. Why you think our country's so innocent?
But I won't attack it because someone fixed me on it. I don't let anybody use me to fight their battles.
Hello, and welcome to Varn Blog. And today we have with us Matt Christman of CushVlog and Chapo Trap House fame.
Hey.
And we're going to be talking about labor history and how a comedy podcaster ? Got so into American labor history. I think you've kind of been into it way before that, actually. But
for sure.
But let's start off with the good news, which is Chris Smalls and the Staten Island factory unionization, which I think is legitimately a big deal. It's the first of the Amazon unionization efforts that has worked. Interestingly, compared to the Alabama unionization effort, it is completely independent and kind of its own, it's its own thing. I think it's something we should be legitimately excited about. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was very honestly surprised and pleased to see them succeed there, especially just like putting together a union sort of on the fly in order to represent those workers and any labor agitation in the logistics center is hugely important because if we don't have choke points of production in America anymore, really, to the degree that we used to, we certainly have logistical choke points. And so people being able to organize there is very important. But yes, at the same time, I mean, I'm kind of bracing for the response because we already know that Amazon is challenging the election with the National Labor Relations Board, and we'll see how that goes and what other tricks they have up their sleeve. And also, of course, how much it can be replicated, because at the same time, the same day that they had their successful vote, the rerun of the Bessemer election happened where they lost. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'm thinking the National Labor Relations Board appeal may be harder to land. I do think it's not just that it's a logistics point, but also that it is in New York. One of the things about, say, if it even happened in Alabama, let's say Bessemer had gone on, it's a lot easier for Amazon to just move shop there for a variety of reasons, including local politicians and local law. And so the threat of just closing the plant is probably a little bit more real. It's still just as illegal there as it would be in New York, but in New York, they're more likely to actually do something about the case.
Right.
Also, losing the ability to service, probably the largest Amazon market outside of LA, maybe even bigger than LA, I haven't actually looked, would be a big deal.
Yeah.
But it's it is still one shop,
right,
in a whole country, and it follows a couple of other trends that I think we need to look at and discuss critically. There has been a growth in new unions in the past 5 years. particularly the past 5 years. But and there's been some success with the Teamsters, although that goes back and forth, and Teamsters leadership is all over the place. In general, however, unionization with currently existing unions is still kind of non-existent.
Yeah.
With Bessemer, you already had a currently existing union trying to do the rep. I don't know. Admittedly, I wasn't excited about that union rep there either, but so I think there's that. And the other thing that I was surprised about, but experienced firsthand, and even in my teachers union, during COVID, union membership dropped. Now in the teachers union, we actually saw a spike in membership in the beginning, and then a plummet over the next 2 years. And the reason for that, my personal opinion, I can't speak for my union, even if I'm a rep, was that the unions didn't do anything, so people quit. So
yeah,
and the reason why they didn't do anything is they didn't want to seem like they were asking for special provisions or additional asks during a crisis like COVID. And that was politically divisive. The ATF and the NEA actually had slightly different stances on that, and the ATF stance. For those of you who don't know, the ATF is the American Federation of Teachers. The NEA is the National Educators Association. They're both unions. The NEA is known to be more organizationally conservative than the ATF, which is run more like a traditional union in most places, but they vary greatly from state to state. They're both in my state, although I believe the NEA and its UEA affiliates in every district has the bargaining rights. And so the AFT, excuse me, not the ATF, the AFT, the AFT or ATF, I can't remember, is at a disadvantage, but the AFT, National Federation of Teachers, yeah, not the National Teacher Federation. All right. The AFT lost a lot of its rank and file support around here and its momentum when Biden came into office, because the national president changed tone on a whole lot of issues the moment a Democrat came in office, saying basically the same thing Trump did as far as that goes. So the old unions have not experienced a lot of growth during COVID, and we saw it look to be a strike wave in August to October. October was just a return to apparently historical norms of striking, but it'd been so low for the past 2 years of COVID that it looked like a blip. But then we've seen a dip since then that is back to below normal striking levels for the United States. So, yeah. So Amazon, great. Starbucks, great. Although Starbucks is a different set of challenges whenever you're dealing with franchises. You have way more steps to go. And I think the other thing we need to consider with the union on Staten Island is, even if all the chicanery with the National Labor Relations Board and all that doesn't fall through, we're still stuck with they can tie up that contract for like a decade.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the infamous but much smaller scale example of this is Burgerville down in Portland, which took almost 10 years to get a contract through.
Yeah, no, I remember when they just recently got it. Yeah.
People are telling me Starbucks is not a franchise, so you don't have the same problem. But I believe the unions are site to site still. So they would
Yeah,
still
it
look
seems
like
like they're going like one after the other.
right. So it's not, you're not even getting like a regional, like all the Starbucks in one area. It's like this Starbucks is unionized and this Starbucks is unionized, which is still the franchise model. So this leads us to a whole lot of questions. And I think this is one of the things that I wanted to ask you about. In your studying of the history of labor unions, is the National Labor Relations Board actually a good idea?
I mean, there is a lot of debate on that question. I mean, there's no question that at the time that it was passed, that it was a huge boon to labor organizing in this country and organizing, entire sectors of the economy, but that it also locked unions into this relationship with the state and with management that left them totally incapable of really responding to the changing conditions that like really start to kick in the 1970s. At this point, it does seem like that the necessity of going through the sort of NLRB hoops is more of a hindrance than a help, because of such the paucity of the support that they actually offer in exchange for that sort of containment that they demand. So at this point, yeah, I think it's probably it outlived its usefulness, certainly for most people, if it's not going to be like actually staffed and funded. Certainly that's another problem, is that the Democrats have sort of allowed Republicans within it to dictate policy, dictate personnel, and keep seats open and stuff, and they don't really have any wherewithal to push back.
Which is interesting that that's still occurring even under, let's say, 2/3 of the government being controlled by Democrats, at least for the next couple of months. So I think the other thing with the Amazon unionization, though, it kind of puts the Democrats in a hard spot. Even someone who I don't necessarily love, like Joel Kotkin has pointed out, that the areas that you're now getting union pushback are areas of industry that are traditionally loyal to the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party has been so favoring rentier policies because of where their strongholds are, which is the Northeast and the Pacific Coast. So that's banking and tech, and Amazon, even though we forget that now, it now seems like Walmart is technically tech.
Yeah.
I think one of the things with the Labor Relations Board that I've really struggled with is, while it did seem to push a massive unionization push in the 50s during the Great Social Compact after World War II, the heyday of actual militant unionism was all before it. And then when you had strike waves in the 70s, it was actually often wildcat against the Labor Relations
Right.
Board.
Yeah.
So it seems like, even before Reagan, it seems to have already seemingly outlived its use, or maybe its use was always to kind of tie labor into the democratic apparatus in a controllable way.
Yeah, they don't. Well, I mean, and the thing is, though, even without that, they still really don't have anywhere else to go. That's the thing. It's like they still have to pursue a political agenda. They still have political funds. They still have political organizations. It's a sort of necessary component of like collectively advocating. And they really, like many constituencies, basically all the ones that the Democrats have left are hostages, because there is no alternative in the Republican Party, and there is no third option. So that's part of it, but they're really stuck there.
It does seem like in the midst of all this, you have the kind of a resurgence of European style conservatism. And when I say resurgence, actually in America, it's not a resurgence. It's almost sui generis of the last 10 years.
Yeah.
But it's glommed onto the paleo conservative movement of like Pat Buchanan. And I've noticed, you know, I'm not going to disparage anybody personally, but some Marxist, some of which I'm even formally attached to, who are now working with them, and Compact Magazine, which is seems to be mostly a national conservative with some token leftist sort of affair. But there has been a move since even back when Steve Bannon supposedly went in and told the GOP that they were now a workers' party in 2016, for the kind of populist conservative to eat up on this rhetoric. Rhetorically, I've seen a lot there, but in actual substance, I've seen nothing. I mean, even with someone like J.D. Vance, I mean, basically what he's pushing is, union-friendly rhetoric, but with right-to-work bills.
Yeah.
Should we be afraid of that?
Well, honestly, I mean, the Republican Party as an electoral apparatus is in many respects terrifying, because it does seek to really heighten a lot of contradictions that a lot of us aren't ready to see heightened quite that high. It's like, Lord, make me humble, but not yet. But the specific valence of the national conservatives, to me, it is just a precise repeat of what happened with the socialists and the Democratic Party in the previous election cycles. Because what you're seeing is the two major political parties facing a crisis of capitalism that is wildly alienating people from capitalism, specifically people at the younger age of the demographic spectrum, the people who have the least access to the remaining fruits of that cargo cult that took over after the end of the industrial era in America. Ones who don't have houses, ones who have tons of student loans instead, young people, and they might have cultural attachments to Democratic or Republican Party, which is the only kind of attachments they can have, since they have no class base anymore. The Democrats don't have a class base anymore. Then they're going to try to come to terms with, this party that I'm supposed to be represented by. I believe myself to be a political active person who wants to shape the future and shape my life, and I have this political process to do it with, and I have this party to represent me, and it's not doing it. And what we saw with that happening among younger Democrats is the Bernie campaign, the Bernie movement, the idea of a socialized Democratic Party that can maintain its cultural structure, its cultural preferences, and its cultural values, but also break from this disastrous connection to capitalism, but keeping the cultural stuff, because that's why they're there. That's why anybody is anywhere in postmodern American politics. And younger Republicans have taken longer to get alienated, but are having the same experiences. And because they're not complete idiots, are seeing that the market is failing. That party is responding the same way. And I don't even mean the party itself consciously. I mean just regular people who blog online, for example, or are podcasters, or just posters of any kind who engage in the discourse on politics. They see this party that they're stuck with for cultural reasons, and try to imagine a different version of it that could confront the failures of the market. And they will have precisely the same impact meaningfully in policy as the socialists did with the Democrats. And their influence in the outcome of electoral campaigns is going to be as marginal.
I mean, one of the things I think Trump proved to me was that someone could pick up all these talking points, pick up all the other talking points at the same time, say them both, and
that's how he won.
And gain a lot of steam from it.
He, as a celebrity and as someone who was willing to break Republican orthodoxy because he could afford to, because he wasn't part of the party and he didn't depend on them for anything, because what politicians depend on the party for is access to the media, and he had direct access to the media, so he didn't need them for anything. And that allowed him to say things that sounded populist, that sounded democratic, across the cultural scheme of the party, preferences. And like one of the things that's a challenge, I think, for Trumpism electorally next time around, and obviously we'll see with the what the economy has to say, which is going to be the real determiner. But part of him governing is that he kind of was wedded more and more to republicanism as such, and like his ability to speak across that barrier has been eroded. Although he did, see big rises in people who are coming into the political process for the first time. I think really what happened with his rising numbers in the 2020 was people who had not considered themselves political, but feeling because of the heightened sense of crisis, and also the degree to which the entertainment spectacle that they are as addicted to as any of the rest of us has been fused with politics and making it impossible to not be political if you want to engage in like spectacular media engagement, which many people are, regardless of what their political priors are, or even if they have political priors or political self-consciousness. And then they were the ones coming newly to the electorate, seeing Trump and still recognizing some of that, nonpartisan, anti-elite energy, because they hadn't spent the last 4 years processing everything happening through a partisan lens, which the more regular voters and the more regular political media consumers were doing.
I think this leads us to one of the contradictions I've seen of the Democrats in the same time period, is they've tried to stake out a counterclaim to capitalism, stake out a claim to being the normality of American politics, as if we could have that back, which, if anything, the last 2 years have shown
it
ain't coming back. But then they also wanted to claim to be a party of the young and the disenfranchised and a party of the elite. And in some ways, the electoral numbers in the presidential election kind of back that up, because if you there was an income predictor on whether or not you were going to vote Democratic, and it was, you make less than $80,000 a year, most likely you're going to vote for a Democrat. Probably don't think of yourself as a Democrat, but you're most likely going to vote for a Democrat if you vote, and that's huge.
Yes.
And in most years before 2020, those people just by and large voted and fewer amounts until about 2016. And then in 2020, they had the highest the highest voting rates we've ever seen for a variety of reasons. But there's also this counter trend we're seeing. Democratic Party affiliation, while still like the dominant party affiliation of the country in raw numbers, is declining kind of rapidly.
Yeah.
And independents right now are increasingly, they look like to be the largest sector of the voting bloc by a lot.
Yeah.
Whatever that means. I mean, I'm just putting on my horse trader hat. Their class indicators are all over the place. Actually, I've been looking for data on like what's the class background of who declares themselves independents, and I can't find a lot except that the ultra rich are more clearly sorted partisanly, and that it looks like right now independents are going to be sitting on their hands at best in the upcoming elections. So, who knows? But I mean, the Democrats might keep the Senate because the Republicans are still kind of at war with themselves. But it looks like they're going to lose the House and maybe lose big.
Yeah.
And they're going to lose even more states.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
And one of the ironies of the Bernie revolution to me is that Bernie Sanders had a lot of appeal, particularly in 2016, actually, in areas where Democrats had lost a lot of appeal, like the industrial Midwest, the West. He didn't do so well in the South, and I actually have explanations as to why, and most of it has to do with fail-in laws, but I've never proven that. The other thing I would say is that the Dixiecrat machine politics of the South was basically inherited by the Black Congressional Caucus.
No, that's 100% true.
And it's a very conservative politics, and it still kind of is.
Yeah.
So while if you're under 30, you might have leaned towards Bernie Sanders. In the South, your likelihood of being able to vote if you're under 30 is like 60% or something, if you're under 30 and of color, particularly Black. So the odds were never going to be great there. But we don't have Bernie anymore.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to see Bernie around 3.
No, hard to imagine.
I don't think we're going to see AOC skyrocketing to the presidency like some people seem to want.
No, I think Anne Hidalgo is a good indicator of some of the blind spots that focusing too much on urban progressive politics can do for you.
Yeah. But in general, I think another thing we've had to look at is there's an ambiguity, not just amongst the Democrats, but amongst the kind of formal ideological left about how they feel about labor. Because a lot of people that I talk to about this, when I talk about, say, making forays into labor and people who are not traditionally part of the Democratic base, what I get thrown back at me is that I'm telling them to tail conservatives, which I've actually said many, many times doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like, tailing conservatives does not work. If you're going to tail a conservative, people will just vote for a conservative because they know what they're going to do.
Right.
So
why would you want the it didn't work for the DLC, why would it work for anybody else?
Right. So that means, well, what do you think it would mean for, say, a semi-socialized Democratic Party in the fantasy land in which such a thing actually exists, to tail labor, as opposed to you saying, like, because I've called, people have talked about how, like, the socialists don't need to be tailists. I'm like, but we're not even tailists. Like, we're not tailing labor. Right. No one, like, so you get a hostility there because it's a lot of people think you're asking them to give up some vitally important, although often numerically not insignificant, but numerically minoritarian viewpoint to tail labor, whereas I personally don't think most workers give a shit about most of those issues, and you wouldn't have to give them up.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that if there is an electoral future for the left, it is going to come from labor organizing, and that the decisions, the crucial decisions about what party to support, or to support their own party, are going to be made by them, by those workers doing that organizing to try to assert their collective power as they find the limitation to the limitations of their ability to affect change once they reach the edge of pure business unionism, and then the necessity of coordinated political action that comes from that. And they're going to make a choice. And I don't think it's going to be the Democrats who are going to be able to be in the driver's seat of those decisions, because the mechanisms for there is essentially no mechanism to coordinate the Democratic Party around anything other than money. That's it. That's the only thing that can actually assert a organizing principle of interest among the various free agents of the Democratic Party. I mean, the Republicans have the same issue, but it's solved for them in part because there's less friction between their base and their electoral class. The Democrats have an inherent contradiction there that just sends fucking sparks up every time that anyone from the left tries to assert power over it. The self-interest of the party people within it turn against them en masse. These people who can't get together to do anything against the Republicans can't get together to do anything against, just the basic survival of their party in terms of, preventing voter disenfranchisement from being enacted, can on a dime be organized along the more vital interest that unifies all of them of keeping their phony baloney jobs. But what that means is that they can't be a credible partner to labor because they have no credibility. And like it might be a point, we might get to a point where the Democrats are so hollowed out and have become are no longer a institution that the amoral and ambitious can use to get advancement. Once those forces have literally just moved on to more verdant pastures, maybe they'll be able to get in there and grab it. But as long as it's a place where the trough can be fed at, you're never going to be able to use solidarity, abstract concepts like that that are understood by different people in different ways, and that have to interact with all of this spectacleized politics that demands placement on all of these questions that are totally tertiary to anything related to the exercise of power. I don't think that they could do it.
Well, I think there's something even more worrying to me that I have. I mean, yes, there's that too, but there's also the fact that the rhetoric of the Fed. Have you been listening to Powell lately?
I don't know. I haven't really. I know they didn't they do a little.
They did a little. They're doing micro interest rates.
They hope that nobody notices.
Yeah. But they also said something interesting when they started that. Powell was speaking to a bunch of bankers, and he said that labor was strong, indicating too strong right now. And that the interest rates are to save the recovery by weakening labor. Now, the second part's implied. He did not say they were out to weaken labor. Traditionally, the Fed's monetarist rationale was that you raised interest rates to encourage saving and decrease borrowing, which would pull money out of circulation, thus decreasing both public and private money creation, and that would slow interest rates. Right. It's not true. The Fed has admitted that's not true. Yeah. So them saying that they're raising interest rates partially in response to the strength of labor is interesting, particularly when even the most conservative economists I've been listening to say that they can only attribute at most 1.5% of the current inflation to raising labor costs, that most of it has nothing to do with that. Which 1.5% is less than a normal inflation rate. So I find that rhetoric very interesting, that the Fed under Democratic boss, and while technically, yes, the Fed is apolitical, blah blah blah. We know it's not. With a secretary of a former Fed person, in this administration, with Yellen, we're looking at monetary policy being pivoted as to deliberate. I mean, the implications of this is we're going to create a small recession to weaken the power of labor to decrease inflation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I can't think of a more nightmare policy for the Democrats to be operating under, or any socialist who've ever made any common alliance with them at all.
Yeah.
Like
yeah, no,
that.
I mean that would be cutting their own throat to a spectacular degree. But I mean, they've done it. They've literally done it before.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like.
No, I mean Volcker shock began under Carter, but
yeah. I mean, and not only that, like it was the unspoken, but it was the unspoken but consensus view in the last like quarter of the Carter term to try to provoke a recession. Like they were doing everything they could to make a recession happen, including attempting. They totally discounted the ideas of wage and price controls, the Keynesian package. No. Of course, the early 70s had proven that doesn't work. We can't do that. So instead, they tried to do credit controls. They tried to prevent how much people could borrow, like consumerly, like literally trying to throw a bucket onto consumer demand to try to derail the economy and stop the inflation that they were also freaking out about. So I mean it's the highest rank you can achieve as a Democrat is to fall on your sword for the greater good. And if there's anyone on earth who's ready to do it, it's Joe Brandon, the loser in chief.
Oh man, he's not going to live long enough to have a redemption arc like Carter.
Well, that's the thing is that for him, defeat, like in the story of Carter's life, that midlife defeat was necessary. It was his humbling. It was a chance to have his complete his story. But losing, chasing the presidency your entire life, having brain hemorrhages and embarrassing yourself along the way, spending 8 years as the vice president to an up-jumped popinjay who doesn't pay attention to you, whiffing at a chance to get an easy layup victory because no one doesn't. I don't. If you don't think that Biden would have beaten Trump in 2016, you're out of your mind. He would have wiped the floor with him. I mean, at the very least, he would have absolutely kept the blue states, the firewall.
Yeah, Wisconsin would have stayed,
even though he was falling apart, because they knew that logic could still apply. So, and then you watch this broad, am I right, guys? Just fall on her face, and then this idiot oaf get to take the throne you've fought your entire life. And then while he's the president, your brain starts literally falling apart so that you can finally claim the office you sought your whole life, but no longer able to hold in your memory anything as it's happening. So you're just trapped in this fucking hall of nightmare mirrors of your past, and then losing the presidential election. So you go down in history as the most pathetic figure in American politics, a one-term president. And I imagine him losing in 2024, going out to give his concession speech, giving the speech, and then immediately just disappearing like Obi-Wan Kenobi, like his suit just collapsing to the floor. It will be his life fulfilled.
Well, it's interesting because you could argue what I'm about to say. I always think about the 70s as a history of one-term presidents, even though two of them, one was technically, I guess, Ford's lost to Carter. It makes him a one term, even though he's one of these fun presidents who was never actually elected, even as vice president.
Yeah.
And then we have the removal of Nixon. I have posited that we might see a lot of weirdness since I've actually thought this since Obama, that we were going to come up where the incumbent advantage was going to start to dissipate because the fuck you advantage to the opposing team was going to start becoming greater and greater.
The incumbent advantage was premised on the notion that a given plurality of voters, that's the important distinction, not just citizens, because they could be getting absolutely fucked raw. But if they're so fucked raw that they don't vote anymore, they're not part of the equation. If you're still voting, it's because you probably think things are going relatively okay, okay enough to care about politics and think it matters. That's for sure. And so you're going to have a built-in preference for the person who is in charge, because why not? Why rock the boat? It's going okay. And that's why you only lose in conditions of like real deterioration. But it seems like we're now locked into deterioration as the presiding experience of everybody. Like you get a huge explosion in jobs, right? Like the economy as all the liberal pundits will emphasize to you, the economy is singing. It's hot. It's a good economy by all of our traditional metrics. Wages are up. Employment is up. Unemployment is almost, we've almost a full employment here. Why? And they get mad about that. They say, well, why aren't you pigs happier with this? And it's because of the type of jobs that have become the default concept of job since 2008, being less and less secure, less and less tied to benefits. The more sort of ostentatiously exploitative, it means that even that metric has lost a lot of its meaning for people, especially, and also the people. There are a bunch of people who just don't look for jobs anymore, and they get written out of the equation. But everybody feels like everything is going to only get worse, and so that means their default going into an election is who will disrupt this apple cart, who will provide a new direction. It doesn't really matter if it's what the policy is. Most people don't care or understand policy. They know there's an affect and there's a general vibe that they key into, and anything like that was what got Trump in the front door. And if this COVID recovery had gone differently, you might see a real consolidation of Democratic control and a real sort of siloing off of the Trump era. Is like, well, we tried that, and how'd that go for you? And that might have led to the chastened Republican Party that people fantasize about. But instead, because of just this huge explosion in negative indicators, as in the things people experience personally, and also more importantly through their engagement with political spectacle, that it's only bad and can only get worse. And so that miss me yet thing with Trump, that's a real pull now in a way it wouldn't have been if they'd gotten anything together to deal with anything that they inherited, which they all knew was coming, astoundingly.
So I'm gonna drop a statistic that's gonna make a lot of people uncomfortable on the democratically influenced left. And as a person who's never cared about the Democrats, other than the fact that people that I care about are sometimes trying to infiltrate them, this doesn't so much burn me. But the best 2 years in the past 20 years for people of color who were below the median income was actually the last 2 years of the Trump presidency.
Mm-hmm.
That's an objective fact. That has nothing. I actually don't think it has a damn thing to do with Trump's policies.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It has to do with the business cycle.
Yeah.
But people have been wondering, why is the Latin vote beginning to defect from the Democrats in seemingly significant numbers? And well, I'm like, two reasons. You haven't done anything about immigration whatsoever in any direction, and so they don't trust you on that anymore. And inflation sucks, particularly if you're an immigrant small business owner, which is a lot of the Latin population. Because of actually systemic racism, they're more likely to have to open up their own businesses instead of being employed. So, particularly out here in the West.
Yeah.
And so there's a huge issue there. And the numbers, the basic bitch 528 polling backs this up.
Yeah.
I
mean, the Democrats at this point only represent the continuation of a status quo. Like, they really do not understand that when they emphasize we need to stop Trump to protect American democracy, that they hear democracy when they say it, and they imagine one thing, which is all the good stuff in the world all the candy and sunshine and ice cream cones that they, as members of like the most gilded class in human history, get to partake of. But increasingly, regular people hear American democracy, and they think this system that produces these outcomes for me and my loved ones, which are horrible and awful. So a threat to democracy becomes an invitation to end this and bring in something else. Like they say it's going to be better, and who is going to say that they're wrong? People who have a vested interest in telling you every day that freedom and democracy are this world and that they're both great. Why would they have any credibility to make any counter argument?
I'm going to pivot, and we will actually talk a little bit about history. But I want to. I literally just spent a good portion of my last week in the hospital, and I've spent in hospitals all over the world. Unfortunately, typhoid is a gift that keeps on giving.
Yikes!
I don't have typhoid right now. I had it 10 years ago, but anytime I get sick with anything, the complications from it can continue to send me back to the hospital. I only bring this up because American hospitals, despite their sheen and their neat equipment, which has gotten a lot neater since I was out of the States and came back, they don't have the personnel to run.
Yeah.
They they were literally just trying to discharge people as fast as they could, even though they get a ridiculous sum of money for not doing so. Because they're so short on staff now, and almost all it, even with people coming in, more and more people being helped by aides and stuff like that, they just do not have the staff to run a normal hospital anymore after 2 years of COVID. And we're seeing in the schools too. All right, there's all this anger at schools right now. Conservatives have used this very successfully. And my personal opinion on this is that the conservative arguments are disingenuous, of course, but the anger at the school system, I think, is more legit than people realize. And my big argument for that is grade inflation's rampant, and yet more and more colleges are just staffed by rich people who will then spend their increased acceptance of things like very rich immigrants as making their campuses more diverse, when what's really driving that, frankly, is the fact that they might be interested in making their campus more diverse, but they sure do love that you're not just charging out of state but out of country tuition.
Yeah.
To the ultra rich of other areas. And it produces very weird demographic shifts here in the United States. Like, for example, how did India and Nigeria become the two richest Indians in Nigeria, Indian Americans and Nigerian Americans, recent immigrants, become the two richest demographics in the United States when those countries are objectively poor? Well, it's actually these policies mixed with a very racist immigration code, where it's very hard for anyone else from those countries to even kind of approach coming here.
Exactly. Like what we're seeing liberalism do is enforce the diversity that justifies their rule, but not by doing what like the promise of the civil rights movement was from the liberals, which was to raise up, our downtrodden Americans who've been systemically and generationally oppressed, so that they can gain access to the same levers of advancement as whites and be able to enter the meritocratic structure on an even footing. Like that's what the promise of affirmative action was. What we're ending up doing, because doing that thing I said would have cost a lot of money, public provision, no place for people to wet their beak, not something that is the neoliberal state can really countenance. But turning education into a way to minimize labor costs among knowledge workers, and also fill the coffers of universities and pay for their massively expanded roster of unnecessary administrators, is to get diversity, but through importing rich people from the developing world who are essentially the same in class background experience as our current upper class, and having them fulfill the role of being the diverse representation of our American ruling class, leaving all of those people who were most exploited and continue to be most exploited and oppressed by American systems to languish, because one approach makes people money and the other one would cost it them.
Exactly, and people don't want to look at this trend at all. When I see, I'm an education researcher, and as my day job, and one of the things I look at is all these reports about the increased diversity of campuses, and even the decreased diversity of things like the Harvard board, which is way more diverse than it used to be. But that's the exact trend that you train, and you saw it begin with doctors. Mostly doctors, actually. And the reason why is in the United States, getting your medical degree is prohibitively expensive and time consuming.
Yes.
It takes a ridiculous amount of time. In most other countries, you can usually test into medical school after 2 years of college. Sometimes you can go directly into it. And once you, and like in a lot of Latin American countries, for example, you can get medical school done pretty quickly. You might have to come to the United States to do residency to get past the ADA's curtailing board, but you can still do that quicker than any person in the US can, and you're coming in with less debt. So you might have 2 or 3 years of debt from finishing, some credential here in the States, while you got everything else done on, say, the state of Mexico's dime. You did your 4 years of public service there. You come over here, you make a ton of money, and you go back. Or maybe you don't go back. Depends.
Yeah.
And there's countries that we particularly do this with. Iran's one of them, believe it or not. Specifically, Iran has a pretty good medical training program. We also see this being done with Southeast Asia, and occasionally with Latin America. There's a little bit more stigma there, though, so there's less of that, obviously. And yes, people have noticed basically encouraging brain drain from the developing world. And I want you to notice the parts of the developing world it's encouraging brain drain from, because you're not seeing us like poach a lot of, say, Chinese doctors.
Yeah.
Right. Or even Korean doctors, for that matter. So that's been the thing sustaining our system. That's breaking down, actually. It's still becoming so cost prohibitive for people to come here that there's less and less of that.
Yeah.
Plus there's all kinds of immigration restrictions there. It seems like there is the artificially induced STEM crisis. And I say artificially induced STEM crisis because there's only a crisis of employment in one STEM field, and that's coding. Everything else seemed to be to encourage people to enter those fields to drive wages down.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that was my favorite. There was a while there where learning to code was this elixir for politicians who could no longer successfully scam people, that education was the key. Like that was too vague. Education in what? This was a specific enjoiner. This can save your community. I know John Kasich was all about that. And it's amazing how you could have that conversation without anybody pointing out that if everybody can learn to code, then the wage value, like of being able to code is almost non-existent. So how the hell does it prevent you from being winding up in the exact same place?
No, I mean, they're just trying to create those conditions in areas where there is enough labor strength, or you like to call like a elasticity of demand in labor, where people could actually command good and not just living wages. That's true across a couple of fields. Logistics, you've mentioned, is one of them. I mean, there's a reason why stevedores have always made a decent amount of money.
Mhm.
Mining is another, because of its because it's just hard to get people where those mines are now, and they are hazardous. And then you have very credentialed fields. At the same time, this push for credentialization and has been driven up and up and up a lot by Democrats in the past 2 decades. But in general, I mean, it was. I remember when I worked at. I won't say their name directly for lack of suability, but I will say their name indirectly. Big Lizard Insurance Company. Um, how many jobs they started requiring degrees for that historically they didn't need? Well, actually, now they're dropping those requirements after 20 years. The reasons they're giving is there's not enough people with those degrees anymore. And the quality of people they're getting out of college is not high enough to continue demanding it, which I may or may not believe, although colleges are increasingly also a joke.
Yeah. You're there for the degree. There's no, it's a transaction. You're paying for a outcome. You're paying for a wage premium. You're hoping that you'll be able to access. Although, once again, people are now not going to college. I mean, the combo of like the dying value of a college education happening at the same time as COVID, which is destroying the one pitch that universities have really developed over the last 20 years to make up for their decreasing ability to guarantee satisfying livelihood, which is a wacky, fun entertainment experience that you can have, a resort you can go to for 4 years.
For the cost of a mortgage.
Yeah. You can go to a cool building and there's a climbing wall. And now it's like, nope, you can't do any of that stuff. We're all Zooming each other. Yeah.
I mean, I think the other thing that we have to look at across the board is that in all areas of American life, we've had admin drift. The reasons for that are complicated. I think Graeber's observations about bullshit jobs are true enough. But I've also pointed out that he doesn't really have a good reason. Like, he just thinks these jobs exist as kind of a conspiracy to keep people busy.
I think that's it. Yeah, I think it's like, oh no, the pros are going to get restless if we don't give them something to do.
Right. Where I don't think that's true at all. I think that there is what you have is systems klug. So we have more legal requirements that require more people to meet those requirements, which then ask for more supports, and it just expands.
Right.
And they have institutional power. If you've ever worked dealing with again, I'm going to use what I know, which is education. In the past 20 years, we've seen school board administration, which is not, the unelected part of the school board's administrative apparatus, triple. So I've seen school districts that even have, low to the relative of the country, cost per student, and you will see that their school board admin office went from 1 story to 3 stories to 5 buildings in the past 2 decades. 93% of all cost of education is staffing. Teachers' salaries as a real percentage of school staffing cost have gone down. Where's all that money going that we've doubled the cost of education for? It's not going to teachers.
No.
But who gets blamed for it?
Yeah.
Because no one even knows these other, if you're not in the know, you don't know these other administrators exist. Most students they know now, I think, because it's made the news, but have no idea that for every one professor, there's literally probably 35 administrators somewhere.
Yeah.
And administrative assistants and aides. This is true in hospitals too. I mean, it's like disproportionately true. And one of the things I have touted that I got called a conservative for once was pointing out that one of the incentives that the Democrats have for not fixing healthcare is that fixing healthcare would immediately unemploy not just the insurance sector entirely, but also this massive administrative sector of hospitals.
Yeah.
And those guys still have their jobs because they can do them at home.
Yeah.
So we have all this right now. And so to go back to labor and labor history, right? You said something interesting about the class base of the. Well, you said they didn't have a class base, and what I find interesting is the Democrats only really had a class base that was coherent for like 15 years, ever.
Yeah.
And it was already falling apart by the time Henry Wallace falls apart as a successor to.
Yeah. When they can't get Wallace on the ticket, it's over. The party has reasserted control.
Yeah. And so, by the time you got Truman taking care of things, now Truman, sees the beginning of the Great Social Peace Compact, where American labor looks to have almost like Fordist instituted private forms of social democratic conditions, right? That only lasts for 11 years.
Yeah.
Like that 11 years dominates the American imagination still.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, because it's when the promise was fulfilled. It's the only real time in American history when the idea of an American dream was like really coherent and accessible, plausibly to a broad swath of the American people, and it imbued all of those institutions with like a credulity that has been slowly eroding ever since. And one of the big disconnects in politics is that our political leaders and our media figures and all the people who actually are like close to the hypothetical levels of power are basically the only people on earth for whom the experience of time since that moment, that apogee, has been has maintained its upward thrust. Like for them, life it's never left that bubble, and they're administrating over people for whom increasingly the only experience has been all of these cherished notions and institutions being associated with continual downward trajectory of life expectations and experience.
So one thing that worries me amongst a lot of the ideological leftist attitude, the ideological leftist I have an attitude, and now we can go to labor history, is that they assume this means that 2 generations, if not 3, would be perpetually loyal to some vision of leftism. Now, I may not be loyal to the Democratic Party. They may not be loyal to, but I keep on being told that. Now, the one thing I will point out is that wasn't true for Gen X. Gen X was the first generation under these conditions. I don't just say it because I'm in that weird, middle generation between Gen X and Gen Y, millennials. But
yeah, me too.
But I also just I remember in the 90s people pointing out, well, this is the first generation of people who have no prospect of seeing things as good as their parents, which was true.
Yeah.
It's still true. They started turning reactionary about 15 years ago. Now, they were never leftist. They were always kind of apolitical when things were better. And I also sometimes defend why they would have never thought about going left. I mean, when they saw the fall of the USSR, they saw Tiananmen Square, they saw the Democrats during the Clinton period and Blair out labor.
Yeah, I mean, leftism was written out of plausibility. It was written out of reality. Like it was not a live option. It was no more live option than like a theocratic monarchy. It was just not something that could realistically be moved toward. And it certainly was nothing that the Democratic Party stood for by its very own like most fervent attempts to distance itself.
But now we have these. There's been an assumption that millennials and Zoomers will stay loyal to this vision of the left, and they might stay loyal to the cultural values. I actually don't really deny that. Boomers were largely loyal to their cultural values, and they were. The big myth was that they were ever as liberal as people thought they were.
Right, yeah. I mean, they were basically, there was all a libertine movement of personal expression, and they were against like private or public power to the degree that they thought that it inhibited them in that pursuit.
Right. now we've had 10 years of a left that seemed viable, but has ended up looking no different than the progressives of the Gen X generation, frankly.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, is there going to be a similar sort of curdling? And I think that as culture just eclipses everything, because it is all that can, it's the only firm terrain you can argue on politically. It's the only way that you can frame politics after a certain extent, because if cultural issues are the only ones that politicians are free to act on because they're not overdetermined by the necessities of the market in its panic mode, then they're the only political issues that are going to be live that people are going to be able to engage with are going to be cultural ones. And that if that's the case, the failure of the Democrats to represent any kind of economic leftism might not matter, because it'll just be a choice of, do you want to live under, Republican reactionary social hegemony? Do you want the bad guys to win? And I think that resentment-based politics is really settling in on both sides, and it's going to kind of keep people locked into this two-party challenge, because it's the only way. It will feel vital, because it will be dealing with like real, like, live categories of in people's understanding, like, citizenship and like their ability to live their lives as they want to, and it'll be as vital as any economic issue, because it'll be the only ones that people feel like they can control, because it's the only levers that seem to be able to be moved by action, by like electoral and democratic will.
But this does bring me to something that I think that maybe we should look to history about a little bit. And I think this is where I totally agree with your thesis about the way politics has become spectacular, but I maybe want to go into why. Because I have been thinking about the erosion of social space due to capitalism for, a long time, before I was even a leftist. Like, this is something I thought about when I was a conservative, actually. It's part of the brainworm that led me out of that.
Yeah.
When I have looked at that, it seems to me that on one hand, these cultural identifiers have replaced all other social identifiers since the sorting of the parties in the 70s.
Yeah.
Because churches can't, even the religious right is at an all-time low in its ability to actually manifest its social power, which would have been its strong point until probably 2004, 2005. It could actually do. I mean, I've told people this and I thought it was kind of nuts, but I'm like, no, Baptist churches used to be able to do actual dual power, particularly in the South. Like,
absolutely,
they could replace government functions.
I mean, the Montgomery boycott, a good example of that.
Right. And religious institutions, before they were captured by the Republicans, were actually, it was hard to guess where they were going to fall on any given issue. I mean, Jimmy Carter had the white evangelical vote in 1976.
He did, yes.
So it's something that was actively encouraged by both sides, from the Birchers forward on the right, and from the end of the Carter administration for the New Democrats forward on the quote left, was to make cultural issues the foundational issues, because, well, labor is just not a consistent voting bloc anymore, et cetera, and so forth.
Why'd that happen?
Yeah, who knew? One of the things that I really have been surprised at the Democrats on, though, is they've even sucked at actually delivering the cultural promises.
Yeah. Well, that's because once again, there are contradictions in the Democratic Party that the Republicans don't have to deal with. And I said one of them is the break in like material interest between their base and their their like political class, but they're also internally divided on culture, because the cultural face of the Democratic Party, which is young, socially liberal, and very intoxicated with notions of social justice, has a completely different view of a lot of these cultural questions than the center of gravity of the electoral party, like the people who actually come out and vote, the people who you need to show up in those suburbs to switch those marginal House districts. And you see that with the Democratic Party and how many people decided to blame the fact that Biden had no real coattails, and the Senate, the Democrats lost so many seemingly winnable Senate races. This party all said it's because of these radicals talking about abolishing the police and LBGTs and whatnot and all that. And that is a contradiction that can't be dealt with, because, I mean, forget the party being able to discipline within itself. This is stuff that's entirely outside the party's control, because like these identifications, these cultural identifications, are made by not members of the Democratic Party, but representatives of the Democratic Party's like side in the culture war that has taken over politics and the just general media spectacle. And
Right.
that means that they're only able, their approach, the Republican, as we're seeing right now, the Republican approach to social issues is just to put the floor on the pedal to the metal and floor it until you alienate enough people that you lose power for a little bit. You know, you chill, you do some reps, and then you get power again, and you just hit the gas. And they're doing it now, but that's because there is no disconnect there between any parts of the party. The Democrats can only go so far before they start alienating their electoral base, at which point they have to try to put the brakes on and try to appeal to them by saying, actually, no, we love the police and we want to fund them more. But of course, it doesn't do anything to bring in Republicans, which is the dream, to bring in the non-radicalized Republicans under a banner of democracy, because they're like existentially alienated from those values, and they're presented culturally by people who are tied and identified with the Democratic Party.
And yet it also, I mean, I totally agree with you, but I want to expand this logic a little bit, because I've been very frustrated with, say, the progressives trying to do certain things where I have gone, well, you didn't create an alternative to the Democratic Party for you to go, but Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema can just become Republicans tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that means they always have more power than you.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you are a captured group. They are not. And
yeah, I mean, we saw that during the Build Back Better thing, because you had this staring contest between two factions. And at the end of the day, the progressives knuckled under because they had less leverage, because they had nowhere to go. And neither Manchin or Sinema depended on the party for anything.
And I think that's something that is both transparent. Like, that's the most simple game theoretic I can possibly throw out there.
Yeah.
And yet there's a basic denial of that in the electoral socialist strategy right now. That, like, well, you didn't create an alternative. And I get it. Creating an alternative is very hard. And in fact, would almost assuredly cost the Democrats elections. Like, in ways that would help Republicans in the short run.
Yeah.
And yet, if you don't do that, you've effectively empowered the right wing of your party and the Republicans, because they do, have some place to go. Although, again, you do see this dynamic actually with, say, elements of, this was why, like, the moral majority never was able to really get its agenda through, because where else were they going to go? This does happen to factions within the conservative coalition, but they also know it, and they trade with each other better And partly they also have a clearer class base. Like their class base is extractive industry capital and petite bourgeois in the Sun Belt.
Right.
And like they know who they are. And then actually a lot of workers who depend on that. Like that's their dependable base. They know how to play to it. The contradictions in the Democratic Party are greater. But I think it's interesting because they've always been like that. Like, okay, look at the Civil War era Democratic Party. Like their base is the planter class in the South, and then Irish immigrants in New York.
Yeah. It came to the head in 1924.
Yeah,
109 ballots, and they're fist fighting in the streets of New York.
Yeah,
the dries and the wets.
Yeah, it's stuff like that. I mean, like that's always been the Democratic problem, except during the FDR regime. But what I find interesting is the FDR regime, in many ways, capital the world over can thank for saving capitalism.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it probably would have not survived the century.
No, absolutely. Yeah, we were there. We stabilized all those contradictions in our big empty field that we got to play on while Europe was gnawing its brains out.
Yeah. But there's no power that's going to do that for us. Like people sometimes think China's going to do that, or China's going to rein in socialism or whatever. And I keep on saying, yeah, but China doesn't have half the world's wealth after a war by accident. And also it has its own problems. It can't produce enough food independently of itself to feed everyone in China. Yeah. It has a highly developed economic sector, but it is totally dependent on trading with other countries, mostly the West, for it to deal with its production, not to become an overproduction problem. Shanghai is going to be hit like climate change like a motherfucker in the next 20 years. And they're still dependent on coal, even though they're better about green energy development than we are by a lot. There's also a couple orders of magnitude more people. And so doesn't look great there either in the long run.
And their economic model and political economy is still premised on making middle-class Chinese consumers, which is not compatible with continued human life.
I mean, I was just pointing out to someone the other day, the diamond phenomenon. Diamonds used to have artificial scarcity. De Beers gave up, I think, lost that ability of pricing monopoly in the 90s. They're expensive now because they're actually scarce. Why are they scarce? China and India and Indian cities, actually, those are the two places consumer market. That's why. Yeah. Like it's that amount. And I don't say that to poop on China. China's done. China in the last 6 years has got its Gini coefficient from above the US's to like somewhere around, say, Germany's, and has actually started investing in rural poverty again after ignoring it for 20 years after the Cultural Revolution and stuff like that. It is doing things that a leftist government you'd want to do, but it's still in the capitalist circuit. There's no way around that, and I don't see a lot of hope elsewhere. Modi's India.
Yeah.
Putin's Russia. The EU.
Yeah.
I say with almost contempt.
No. I don't know. I keep thinking that it's just going to be a matter, really, not of challenging or overcoming capitalism, but of surviving its crisis and organizing in the rubble, really. Organizing in the places that have been the places that have where capital's sort of dominance is rescinded just out of a need to redistribute resources.
Yeah, I think you have a. I think my hope for humanity is actually in the socialists surviving maximum entropy. Historically, that's how revolutions have actually happened, whether we like it or not.
Like, yeah, right. Yeah.
Usually you have, and I don't mean because everyone got poorer. Actually, that's not true. Usually social conditions are quite good. Then there's a war. Then everything goes to shit very quickly. And then you have a revolution out of a high point of strength that just falls apart.
Right.
That's the historical model. I mean, that's what happens in France. The French Indian War is a direct correlate to why the Ancien regime was unstable. That's what happened in the Bolshevik Revolution. Is totally dependent on World War I.
Yeah.
At the same note, I think socialists who are waiting for a war to do anything are totally boned because we have nuclear bombs now. And
yeah, that middle area, that kind of war that shakes the wind that shakes the barley, that's sort of off of the menu now. It's either low level insurgency that just feeds the military complex cycle. It doesn't disrupt anything, or just apocalyptic annihilation. Nothing in between.
Yeah. So I have some questions that I think might be interesting to you. This one is from streamer Borhava, which I'm promise I'm mispronouncing. Do either of you have faith in professional class as guiding force, perhaps as an activist force, scientists, healthcare workers, engineers? I'm going to let you answer that first, Matt.
It's very hard to imagine, simply because there's no way to talk about politics from that level as a member of this professional class that does not involve engaging with the political discourse, the capital D discourse, that it by its nature at every second removed from a statement or an action by a person and that is towards its abstraction and its communication to others, you just lose you lose so much of the actual intent, and what is left is the flattest cultural symbols, the flattest cultural signifiers that then is used by people who are not part of that class to just sort you in one side or the other, to either ignore, agree with meaninglessly, because what does it mean? Okay, yeah, you're right, we need to do something. Well, what? There can be no answer to that question that doesn't get lost in the baffle chamber, because doing things means actually doing things in your life, like taking time in a space to do an action, ideally with other people. And politics, as we understand it, is not that. It is doing things by consuming content to imagine yourself in a relationship to what's happening around you that does not actually extend to doing anything. And I honestly do think, though, that the declining conditions we're talking about are going to make doing things more urgent to more people, and are going to sharpen a lot of these questions into real live ones, and not theoretical ones that could be batted around impotently in the cyber realm or in the discourse. And as that happens, real coalitions will emerge, but it's not going to be from the firmament. I really don't think. But people in those areas will absolutely be crucial to any future movements, but just not from the position of having started or guided them, but from the position of joining them as they arise.
So I'll answer this as well. Do either of you, I'll just repeat it again. Do either of you have faith in the professional class as a guiding force, despite Adam 2's no, or perhaps as an activist force? I sure, as a part of a larger force. One thing I will say is, from studying complexity theory a la Joseph Tainer and mixing that with Marxist class analysis, professionals, if they join with the working class and share their skills, which also starts to remove their specialness, right?
Yeah.
That's going to be vital. That's going to be vital for their survival and for the working class's survival.
Yeah.
So yes, in that sense, sure. But as a class in and of itself, no. I don't think professional class is coherent as a class in and of itself.
Yeah, none of them are, but because we have to reconstitute, and we can only reconstitute the way that they were reconstituted in the first place, and that means at the point of exploitation at the point of labor. And that is a place that for the professional is just absolutely shot through with a mystification and a ritualized ritualized diffusion of alienation, of like felt sense, and with it a subconscious cleaving to the institutions that exploit you, because they provide you with something that you perceive as better than the alternative. Whereas class consciousness arises from the communal experience of exploitation and the ability to communicate to other people experiencing the same thing, your shared, the shared reality. And that's going to be the workers. It always had to be. It always will be.
This is a question. Do we see any major world power developing beyond social democracy and into socialism before the true climate disaster occurs? I'm going to let you answer
that one. I think.
Yeah. The answer is no. Also,
big no.
Also, the true climate catastrophe is already here.
Yeah, it's already happening.
It's too late now.
Like everything is the changes that are gonna happen, the shuffling of the deck that's gonna happen, the shuffling of the deck chairs, I should say, that's gonna happen, and at the levels of politics and the economy are all going to be done in a continuing crisis context of crisis, where this process whereby like democracy is dying, that liberals are absorbing, is really just a triage as the necessary elements for the continuation of capitalism in conditions of crisis that are ongoing can perpetuate. And that means getting rid of the stuff that is too expensive to keep holding on to. And a lot of our fantasy notions of our democratic system are among those ballast pieces that just are no longer necessary and are going to be continually discarded over time. So, yeah, there's no place for political reality in those conditions to suddenly, without the working class there to force it, say, "Hey, let's be nice to each other. Let's overturn these principles that have dictated all of our actions to this point, and dictate the people who get to carry out actions in the first place."
Right. So this one specifically to you, and I don't even know what it's talking about. Could Matt briefly go over the butternut thing again? Those were Southern migrants to the Midwest, right? So
yeah, I love that phrase. It's stuck with me since I was a kid reading about the Civil War. And sometimes I bring it up, and people are always baffled. And it's like, oh, never mind. That's just me. I'm the only person who still cares about these things. Is that so? When the Midwest was settled, it was settled in bands, in rough geographic continuity. So the northern Midwest was settled by New Englanders. Michigan, Wisconsin were settled first by, and northern Ohio, the Case Reserve, the Western Reserve, were settled by New England Yankee immigrants. Southern Ohio, Southern Indiana, Southern Illinois were settled by Virginians and Kentuckians. And they were known before the Civil War as butternuts, and they were associated with pro-slavery politics. They famously lynched abolitionist printer Elijah Lovejoy in Cincinnati. And yeah, they were known as butternuts. And then during the war, the Confederate uniform, basically that color too, when it wasn't gray.
All right. So I have one here. What's your favorite treat, and what would you recommend to a suckling hog like myself? Okay, this is a fun one.
Very, very mature. Man, I don't know if I could possibly say a favorite treat. My God, there's just so many. Lately I've been into this condiment though that I highly recommend. Chef Troy's garlic chili. It's fantastic. You put it on basically anything. I like to put it on mac and cheese. It's wonderful.
All right, this one. What do you mean by share skills? Teaching electricians about electrical engineering? I mean, in general, share skills. Like most of your professionalization is due to skills hoarding and credentialing, meaning not just that you have the knowledge to do it. Okay, we don't have equal knowledge sets. No one expects us to either, even under socialism. But we don't have equal access to those knowledge and skills either. We hoard them as professional secrets.
Yes.
And we need to stop doing that. And I do not just mean like Sci-Hub and putting it all out there illegally for free through Russia, through the Russian internet or whatever. I do mean like actively teaching people stuff like electrical engineering. Electricians need to do this as well. This was the theory behind the Russification of intellectuals in the Cultural Revolution, not punishment. And I talk a lot of smack about China, but I actually think that part of the Cultural Revolution was smart. That it's also why in Latin America, for example, there's almost no vaccine hesitancy. Why? Because healthcare workers live in the same communities and share their skills with those communities all the time. Whereas in the United States, healthcare workers, with the nurses and aides being a liminal category that, kind of like teachers that are sort of in the professional world and sort of in the worker world, because they're credentialed and they're hard to scab on, so they can strike, and so they have some benefits that the people don't have. Also, you have to have education, but they're treated like shit, and they are also wage earners, and the hospitals can't function without them. But with those people aside, you don't know your doctor really anymore. They're not people in your community in which you live and have a relationship of whose skills you trust. You actually are probably increasingly have a hostile orientation towards them because they are completely foreign to you. And I don't mean foreign as in foreigner, as in not your same race, because that's not the relevant vector here. I mean foreigner as you do not know them or people like them in your daily life. If you're a working class person. And that's why woo infects those communities like mad. It is and I don't think we should be dishonest about that.
Yeah, I gotta say, for that and many other reasons, I do not support. I mean, obviously it'd be better than the present conditions, but as an end state, as an end goal, I don't get that excited about free college. What I get excited about is the idea of abolishing the university system entirely and replacing it with free education in any advanced subject in a community. Maybe some regional like hubs for like stuff that's very capital intensive, like specific sciences and stuff. But like the stuff that most people need to learn, want to learn in school, should be accessible for free in the community. And I think that should be the basis for higher education.
Yeah. This is a good question. I guess it's to both of us, mostly to me. What will motivate people to share skills if it puts you out of work and lowers your income? Usually nothing, actually, except for survival, which is what motivated it in China in two different revolutions. Well, in two different phases of the revolutions anyway. But there was also a revanchism against that in Dingism. I mean, like explicitly, some of that was revenge of the technocrats for being made to go and live with the peasants for a while. And by peasants, I mean literal peasants in this case. Well,
I mean, ideally, what would happen, in a functioning system is that your wages might go down, but that you would be socially provided for. Like the things that you the things that you depend on your salary to provide for you would be provided by a socialized provision of necessities. But of course, that's the dream that we've all been stomped in our head forever is impossible because of human nature.
Right. Cultural Revolution, rural doctors and teachers were paid off of social credit. Social credit did give them currency eventually, but it was basically a work points program. I'll be releasing an interview with Dongping Han about this next week. He's a little bit more rosy on all things China in the 50s, 60s, and 70s than me, but I think I've done the research on it. It actually backs it up. When they stopped that work point program, life expectancy went down. Or no, it stopped gaining in China for several years. So during the quote Dingist revolution, where everything was supposedly made better, look at the life expectancy. You can look it up. I was surprised. I confirmed it. It stagnated during the early 80s and even got worse in the 90s. A lot of that had to do with the end of the Bedford Doctors Program, the end of socialized medicine in China, which, yes, it was ended. And the end of even free primary school for rural people. They only have free primary school in the cities. So, you know, there are other people who will be incentivized to do this. Yes, there are always loons like, I don't know, me, who try to teach people things, but I'm also a poet. I don't know what I'm going to teach you that's super useful. I mean, I do understand basic programming, but that's neither here nor there. I would say that socialized healthcare is more, it's a more pressing need. I totally agree. I'm commenting and responding to someone, but I actually don't agree with that as a sauce to vaccine efficiency, because the relationship to vaccines to socialism is exactly zero. Bolivia actually has one of the worst vaccine rates in Latin America. And then the other, so how you set up your socialism also matters a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, this is on the next program, then we'll wrap this up. We didn't talk much about history, and I apologize for that, but I guess
good talk.
Yeah, it was a good talk. Is that Chinese mouse guy you're talking to with the Cultural Revolution about, or is he a Chinese new leftist? He's an actual member. He was a person who was raised on a farm in the Cultural Revolution who teaches at Warren Wilson College. So he's speaking from firsthand experience, and he's a scholar of it. So I guess there was one question. Can we pivot this pessimism about politics into something more useful? And I know you do a lot of this on CushVlog. I increasingly do this in my more abstract and mathy way here. Is there a way in which we could be building towards socialism in this likely series of crises that are going to hit in the next 3 to 4 decades that aren't, that kind of opt out of this political bind, because the political bind is not something we're going to fix.
Yeah, no. I mean, the way I think of it is that, like, my pessimism and my performance of it for an audience is meant to have, if I can, delude myself into thinking that there's any positive value to it, it is that it contributes to a process I think most people are going through to one degree or another of detaching hope from politics that they may have spent the last few years getting really infused with. And when I say hope, I don't just mean hope that conventional politics will improve things, but also that participating in politics at the abstract level of consuming political media and voting, and maybe campaigning, volunteering for campaigns if you're a real firebrand, would constitute meaningful political action in your life. And that is, I think, a big contributor to investment in political media, is the thought that I'm doing something with this. And I think that reminding people that they're not, and trying to make this entertaining, my output entertaining to the degree that it is entertainment, and also providing what I think is relatively, in my view, what else could I say, grounded analysis that then people who can live with that dissatisfaction, basically, to live with the hole that used to be filled when they consumed political media, and hopefully that hole, there will be a recognition that hole can only be filled by action, and that by definition, electoral politics, if you do understand them in the terms that we're discussing, cannot provide you that. So what could? And then that you have to seek that answer, and that answer can only be found individually, because in the ether, we're all talking about abstractions.
I have a similar attitude, basically, that what we should be doing now is building up communities, because the abstractions that we're giving are only useful in those communities. As entertainment, they're fine. As politics,
Yeah.
I think it's um I think it's a fairly useless gambit. I also, what I've seen people move from on the left, and there's cycles of this, they move from domestic policy into foreign policy, and increasingly into foreign policy about countries of which they have absolutely no control,
That's
which,
favorite people pastime. Oh my God, the stakes are non-existent. How could you not love it?
right. I mean, because it's just like, well, yeah, you can make a big radical grand gesture and it matters, or even has any cost to you.
Exactly. That's the big thing. It's
all
like
of
it
nothing.
costs nothing. It advances nothing, but you get to care a lot and think that you're fighting some anti-imperialist. You're on the digital you're on the digital barricades with an anti-imperialist coalition. And it's like, no, you're literally doing nothing to avoid, and you're doing nothing. You're doing this to avoid having to ask that question of what should I be doing?
Right. So, this is not to say, like, people are thinking we're saying spreading ideas is useless. We're not saying that. And in
No.
fact, one thing I think that I push people on is to skill yourself and to share skills as much as possible.
Yeah.
But I also think you should know that's what you're doing. And most people, it's actually the great irony, and maybe this is the last point to end off of. I think you've said similar things, maybe even the exact same thing, and we've arrived at it convergently. But when people started making everything political, nothing was political.
Yep.
Like because there's no clear action space, our goal,
Precisely.
our set of skills, or any defined. It's kind of like how I talk about war, and I said, well, the United States didn't lose the Iraq War. It didn't even lose the Iraq War because what was the objective?
Right. It was to have it.
Yeah. What is the strategic thing in which you could win or lose in the first place?
Yeah.
So that, in so much that you're getting that kind of clarity, it's useful. But you guys, you're going to do much more by going to a union meeting. And I'm going to tell you, union meetings mostly suck.
Yeah.
They do. I'm in one, I know. And it's a slog. And there are days where I think my union's almost worse than my HR department. But almost. But it's also important to think that out. Now, I do want to ask you a question. I guess somebody did ask. Do you think it's important for us to understand global politics, like what's going on in Ukraine or this, that, and the other?
I think if you are of a certain type of mind, I don't think you can avoid trying to seek out an understanding of your world. I mean, we are, especially now that we've been cybernetically linked to the internet. We imagine ourselves world citizens in a way no other people ever have. And that means that defining ourselves that requires a certain level of knowledge just to fill in, the identity. So seeking out that information is, I think, you can't even tell people not to. It's ridiculous. I think the pitfall is in investing a lot of emotion in having a side.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the real pitfall of caring about world events, is trying to fit them into a grand heroic narrative where you can pick a side and root, because what you're doing is just, you don't even know you're doing it, but you're turning it into sports so that you can divest yourself of a lot of the anxiety that you're feeling as a neutered political subject.
People are saying if you're paying for the arms, you're involved. Yeah, but you have no say over who.
Yeah, exactly.
Over that payment.
What are you gonna do? You gonna stop that? You cannot.
That's
that notion of collective responsibility. It's I mean, I remember Ward Churchill and the Little Eichmanns and that, how that was somehow became the left response to 9/11, is that, they had it coming because of their participation in empire, this totally amorphous world thing. And
I do remember that.
You get to set the terms of debate about the moral worthiness of office workers. It's what does that have to do with the actual structures of power that are determining these outcomes?
Yeah, I had a debate recently where somebody I hadn't thought about World Churchill in a decade, Matt. But but I had a debate with somebody recently about this where they were like, well, the American worker really showed that they didn't give a shit about what happened to Russia after 1992. And I was like, the American worker had no fucking idea what shenanigans anybody was up to. And
they're doing structural adjustment. Somebody runs out of the shop floor.
Like nobody, like I didn't learn about that until I was 30. Yeah. And I'm fairly informed. So, you know, it was actually when I was 30 and I went abroad and I was like, oh, I kind of see maybe what Putin is talking about historically a little bit. Like, I don't necessarily think his politics are good and they're definitely not left wing, but like I can see how one had gotten there and why one might even cynically use that. But I didn't know about it. Yeah. It is funny that people project, particularly now, because now we really do, with the exception of like how the Chinese Politburo works, which I do think is still fairly opaque. We do have a massive amount of exposure and knowledge to places of the world that you just simply didn't have when we were kids.
Yeah.
But even now, you have no say over that policy.
Yeah. Yeah, and responding, we all have a responsibility to, you know, respond to our conditions, but part of that is recognizing what actions are liable to result in change and which actions are symbolic or therapeutic. And recognizing the distinction, I think, is key to being an effective political agent and what the discourse operates to obscure for you.
I'm gonna say something that's gonna piss a lot of the people right now off. You have no effect on the foreign policy of your government unless you can shut down production, and you can't, particularly because arms production is not all just in one country anymore on purpose.
Yeah.
All right. The reason why I point that out is like there's this myth that all these protests and stuff or what had anything to do with the Vietnam War ending. No, the Viet Cong fucking won.
Yeah.
That's what ended the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And
the U.S., the military became an ineffective fighting force because they wouldn't fight them anymore.
Right. You know, like if you're, as far as like arms sales goes, I have not seen where protesting that in history has mattered ever. And I know that upsets people, but like, I can already tell you there's study after study after study that indicates that popular opinion has no effect on even domestic policy, really, but has definitely no effect on foreign policy. You are insulated from it by design.
Yeah.
So, you know, and by the way, that's why we don't ever institute the draft, because that might actually give people an effect on foreign policy.
Exactly.
They would vote
because
with their
then
feet, shoot their officers.
If you have it wasn't the people protesting on the streets of America. It was the people shooting up and fragging their officers in Vietnam, which was that conscripted army. So we can't allow people with, you know, to give them guns when they don't, you know, want to fight. We'll see what they'll do with them. But yeah, if everyone
when you're
is
dealing with
safely
treaty obligations under NATO or something, like there's these things are not things that populations of states generally have any control over.
Yeah.
And I know that people don't like that. Is there other forces of counter influence you can measure? I guess. But on margin, I don't think so. And so that whole notion to me feels like a way to justify your own moral position. And, you know, good on you. I mean, if you are sustained by that morality, then more power to you. It isn't going to change much.
Yeah. And if you really want to embody like a morality that has a political dimension, then you need to act more than to have curated that opinion or expressed it publicly. And that's the challenge. And it's a difficult one to meet. And honestly, I think a lot of the times you will get to, if you even discard politics, you'll end up getting back to it from a position of like real engagement. If you do commit to living virtuously and morally in your life otherwise.
Right. I mean, for example, I think like if you really wanted to do something about the war, you'd have to have a massive solidarity movement with unions who are willing all to go against Taft-Hartley and shut down production to stop NATO. That might do it. But you'd actually have to do stuff. And I hate to inform you, but direct action against the military is usually a good way to die. So, so you know that is where I do get really kind of like what I'm not saying you can do nothing, and I also saying like as far as public opinion goes, here's what I think you can do, just publish what you think is the truth. But if you actually go and like do this big anti-imperialist screed, you know what's going to happen. You can get treated by most people like a crank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's the bigger issue for me is like when I try to do nuanced, I do nuanced stuff on geopolitics all the time, but it's not because I think we're going to have much of an effect on even the US's policy in these areas, even though I'm a taxpayer. I think the reality of the situation is, despite what leftist habitus is that getting the information out may change public opinion over time. But even that, I mean, public opinion had no effect on the Iraq and Afghanistan wars.
Yeah.
Or when it finally did, it was like, what, 15 and 20 years in retrospectively?
Yeah. And also, I mean, the thing is, like, there were people who were against the Iraq war, but they were swamped by the people who were at that time in favor of it because they were not seeing the war through the lens of like a advanced leftist heuristic. They were seeing it through the apolitical screen of de facto American imperialism and capitalism that constitutes the superstructural culture, and as a result, they were all for it. And trying to tell them to be against it meant challenging them on premises that are just too deeply rooted to be undone by an encounter with an interview with a protester at a rally or something.
I mean, and the stuff that you would have to do to actually affect this requires levels of infrastructure that don't currently exist. And so if you want to do that, I guess you could be building that infrastructure, but that would be the thing that we've said for everything. And I don't really know. I cannot tell you how to do that. Yeah. If I already knew how to build a massive counter infrastructure to the U.S. government, I would not be on a podcast. I'll tell you that. Yeah. So, this is not to say that there's not like, it's not to say that you should shut up about it. It is to say you should think very carefully about how you speak about it.
Yeah. Like, what is the purpose of your speech?
Right.
Like, have an intention in mind rather than just a notion that anything I say about politics is like helping the cause in some small but meaningful way that I can, use to just fuel my reactive engagement with the take cycle. Instead, be like, what is my actual goal in communicating this idea in this way?
And unfortunately, a lot of political organizations that have taken stances on this stuff have made the mistake of thinking that their stance is the important thing they need to do.
Right.
But anyway, that's a long rant because that's an area which I think there's a disconnect between socialist rhetoric and anything I see as a possible way of influence on the near term. I am going to say also it is very hard to speak about things like Ukraine and Russia in a way that doesn't make you somebody's sucker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
because I've seen a lot of people been made somebody's sucker on this topic. And even sometimes I'll admit this, I've had people on my show, one person in particular who I'm not going to name because I don't ever disparage my guest, who even I was shocked at some of the stances they took. And I felt like I was kind of a dupe. And so I'm very careful on that. And I would advise all of you to be as well. Okay. Anything you want to say in closing, Matt?
One foot in front of the other. All we can ever do is, we don't know what else to do. We know we have to do that. So start from there.
All right. And with that note, someone's like, well, Americans will outcrank you. I'm like, yeah, but that, again, chattering discourse that goes nowhere signifies nothing. I mean, like, yes, a lot of it, a lot of people's Uncle Steve are also cranks on foreign policy. I mean, in the opposite direction. Somebody probably thinks that we should give Kiev nukes tomorrow. I don't know. I mean, there's all kinds of. I'm surprised at how many good liberals don't understand what a no-fly zone means with a nuclear power. I will say that. Right. But I don't know what you're going to do there. So on that note, and with possibly pissing everybody off, we're going to end there. Thank you so much, Matt.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was great.
It was a fun time. And we are